Welcome. My name is Austin Chadwick, and Chris Lucian will be presenting, and we'll be sharing a little bit about our story here in a bit. But we're here today to talk about the future of product development. So, we'll be talking about, as the agenda says here on the next slide, we'll be talking about our past, our current present, and then warning, we'll be giving our predictions and our feelings on from our reflections on the past and present, what we feel like what would happen in the future if good things keep getting turned up, whether it's developing products or working with designers and to make products and those kind of things. And so so welcome to the future product development from Chris and I's perspective. So jumping right into the past, Chris, do you mind sharing your history and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my past. So I'm Chris Lucian. I'm the director of software development at a irrigation company called Hunter Industries. And at this company, we essentially have been where I was originally in a internal software role, and then kind of eventually went to product development. But before that, I worked in things like environmental chemistry and military contracts. I've also worked in cardboard box manufacturing, writing software for cardboard box manufacturers, as well as medical billing and collections, things along those lines. So, but leading up to now, we make kind of global scale IoT irrigation products.
Right on. And your past. And one thing I'll note about the past before moving on to the next slide is it'll come up later when we talk about the future. But Chris also has a master's in machine learning. So
there we go.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. So the past of mob programming. So when we were working on internal software, where we're at. This is what the environment looked like. We started working together in this way. You can't really see it, but we started mob programming here. So there's a projector on the table there in front of the person at the keyboard, who's the driver, and then everybody else is the navigator there. And so we're kind of guiding the way to write the software as it is on the screen. We bring in, basically product ownership for direction on the current needs for the software. And so that was really successful. And so, essentially the way that it started, though, was there was essentially a deadline that somebody was definitely not going to meet. They were working solo. They've been working on this for 1.5 years, 2 years, and they realized that they're not going to finish it. And so, and it was kind of tax related, really important. So they ended up coming to the team and saying, you know how we do learning sessions with Randori style katas? Well, can we do that, but on this thing that I've been working on? And so quickly after that first day, we kind of decided actually it would be essentially better to start nearly from scratch from certain components of it. And we started mobbing on it, and it wasn't even called mobbing then. There was no concept of mob or ensemble programming in the industry. And so we kept retrospecting on it. We kept doing that. We delivered their 1.5 year long project in 3 months, and with essentially no bugs in it, and it was able to do the function that they needed. So there was a lot of just lean thinking in there, and a number of other things, but it kind of took off there. And then 4 years later, we had been doing that on internal products. The company decided to scale that and include it in product development. And for the last 6 years since then, this will be the 10th year that we've been doing mob programming full time. And now we have about 30 people full-time mob programming on various mobs with various products and things like that. So we're doing full-fledged product development, a lot of, focus on everybody doing the same thing at the same time on the same computer.
Yeah. And so partway through that timeline is kind of where I kind of came in and joined the kind of the mobbing world. But a little bit about me first. So my name is Austin Chadwick. As you can see, my family here, and so I've been in software engineering about 15 years, and basically at like 5-year chunks at a time, I've been through the different kind of software life cycles for product development. So first place I was at was very waterfall, very traditional, and then went to a place later on where we experimented a lot with more, Scrum and other more kind of like mainstream agile, so to speak, right? And while I was there and learning extreme programming, I've played several different hats, business analyst, scrum master, developer, tester, kind of a process engineer kind of thing. And while in that transition, we were learning extreme programming, like test-driven development and pair programming. And then I heard about this people, Chris and these other people doing mob programming. I'm like, that sounds incredible. How can multiple people be working on the same thing at the same time? And how does that work? And so I visited and got to experience mob programming. And after visiting several times and trying it out and loving it and seeing the incredible results, just how fun it is, how effective it is at product development, the low bug rates, and everything else, I wanted to keep doing it full time. So I'm joined in and been doing it full time for the last about 3 years. And that led to I came a little bit after this, but maybe Chris, you can talk about scaling from one mob to multiple and what that was like in a non-remote environment.
Yeah, so this is when we were still in person. And you can kind of see this is kind of the beginnings of this. And so maybe there's 3 or 4 mobs in here, but we eventually ended up with 7 to 8 mobs. You can kind of see the large screen TVs, everybody sitting around at them and working on the software together. So this also, just like the inception of mobbing, where it was kind of an emergency and everybody needed to get together to work on things, there was a similar situation in the product side where we were saying we need production software fast. And this other process, there was actually a third-party audit of software product practices between teams. And they came back saying this was the most effective way that they'd seen doing software development. So the company decided to scale it. And so that's how this building ended up being there. And we, in the process, had replaced the systems that we were behind on with fully tested, full-fledged software, and we were able to do it in a very lean and fast way. So the company scaled it, and then obviously we onboarded the remote thing much later in 2020, and that also was very effective because I'll just say that interaction with our product owners became very fast and frequent. And so the software moved along a lot faster in that situation.
Yeah, right on. And before going to the next slide, I'll point out a couple things here is that the people in the mob is often diverse, so it could be traditional software developers, front end, back end, but there are also specialists like designers. They may not mob full time, but they'll be in the mob for a time. We have DBA specialists that'll be in and out of different mobs and mobbing full time. Kind of more pipeline or DevOpsy type stuff. And then product owners will also join the mobs for periods of time and come in and out. And so it's a diverse set of people, not just a bunch of like, while it has been done, like 5 front-end developers mobbing, that's not typically, we shoot for diversity. And so this kind of helps us transition from the past to the present, which we'll start leading into talking about the future later. But Chris, do you want to kind of describe this slide and what it's telling us about how things have changed over time in regards to testing and cycle time? Yeah.
So this is kind of the history, I would say, of things that happened over the years. So one thing I tell people is like all the things that we do today came on iteratively. It wasn't like overnight we were doing these practices, right? And so back in 2011, things were just solo, done, by people did things by themselves. Cycle time was like 6 months to 1.5 years, that sort of thing. In 2012, we just started full-time mobbing, and that we onboarded unit testing. We kept manual regression, but our cycle time greatly decreased because we were like, hey, let's release this now. And we started becoming more likely to negotiate with the product owner when we could release something tangible to production. Then 2013, we'd been mobbing for a year and a half or so. We were doing unit testing and then manual smoke tests and then releasing. And so we were able to kind of release things in the same day. And so we were getting new features to product owners every day. In 2014, we automated our smoke testing and we had all of our unit tests. And so we weren't doing automated regression testing yet, but basically every 4 hours we were able to release something new. Typically it was a feature of some kind. And at that point, I'd say in 2014, we also had gone a year and a half with no bug reports back from production. So we were releasing twice a day and getting no bug reports back. In 2015, we kind of started onboarding Gherkin and testing. And so we had, we basically had some manual and automated smoke testing, but in reality, we could just, but that was the time we started scaling, and that's when we had onboarded 2 mobs. And now we're just getting many releases per day. So, fast forwarding to 2020, it's capsule testing, unit testing, and then very infrequently manual regression testing, with mostly automated smoke testing. And so, and releasing more than 14 times a day. And so this is kind of like the cycle, or not the cycle, but the direction that things went in as we started mobbing. Things just got better and better and better over time. And so, and as you can see, the differences become really stark as you add these things as you go.
Nice, yeah, and we'll highlight the word automated because that'll become important later when we talk about the future. But you can see an increase in automation over time. So going past to present, so I think this was there from the beginning for mobbing for a long time, but it's also definitely here in the present, which is kind of more on the interpersonal side and the continuous improvement side. All our teams, we seek to have extreme ownership. So the teams decide how the work gets done. And so they decide the tools to use, the tech to use, and the team decides. There's no one person kind of dictating how things are done and how the mob how each team and mob operates. And then we have built in retrospectives and dedicated learning. So some mobs, it's multiple times a day, these little mini retrospectives where we talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what adjustments can we make to turn up the good or turn down the bad. And then also something unique is dedicated learning times. So for 1 hour, Monday through Thursday, the teams have time to learn, and learning is innovation in a product development company. And then on Fridays, we have 3 hours for learning. And so what that means is that you have this loop of learning innovative things, retrospecting with the team, and then since the team has ownership to implement those new things, innovation can happen very rapidly and very quickly, which is important for that process. Maybe Chris, you can talk a little bit about in the mob how the different roles and what happens to people when they come in as a specialist and what happens in the mob over time, maybe. I think that there's a couple of things, like, if people want to remain specialists, a lot of times they'll bounce between mobs, it's basically, if you're not learning and you're not contributing, go to a different mob. That could even be extended to, if you're not learning what you want to be learning and you're not contributing, go to a different mob. Then, the idea is that if you're, you might kind of travel between mobs and provide value where you can in the different areas. Alternatively, other people can go from more T specialist to M specialist sort of style, where you have multiple more deeper understandings of certain areas. And so we see that a lot, where somebody might have a key area of focus, but in general is kind of a little bit more of a generalist than a specialist in that.
And it's probably important to clarify that it's
Yeah,
not just these roles, right? Designers would
yeah,
be
exactly.
product owners, product managers. Yeah.
Yeah, and so actually in the time lapse videos that we have of our day, often you'll see product owners come in and work with the team. Sometimes they join in on the rotation. That's very infrequent, but instead they discuss things and show things. But we might do real time work while they're there so that we can get instantaneous feedback on certain things that we do. And so then the skills kind of translate across everyone, and somebody's title in our environment really just relates to the area that they will be focusing on learning. But a lot of the time, people who have a QA background are doing software development. People with a security background are doing QA. People with a design background are doing operations, like that sort of thing, because we have kind of everybody there, and a lot of this is in the name of like lean flow efficiency. So if everybody's present, then the feature is likely to get to production very, very quickly, because you're not throwing things over the fence, you're not adding it to a ticketing system. It means it's going to get from beginning to end in one fell swoop.
Yeah, and on the note of this slide doesn't have everything. I had a lot of great pairing and mobbing sessions with a designer last week, and and like Chris was just saying, everyone who was needed is there, and so the things just moved right along and got done right away with the designer. So it was a lot of fun and good time. And then so the other pictures we showed people in person mobbing. Well, how does this kind of work? Multi-mobs remotely, and so you can kind of see this here. So this is kind of what it looks like from the mobber's perspective. So here's Chris with his cat, and the cat is a very important mobber that the team would suffer without. But as you can see here, in the bottom, basically there's code up, there's Kanban, and the Kanban can also be mock-ups from the UX designer or things from the product owner, and our analytics and things to inform our decisions. And then you have the mobbers. And so it's basically like being in person, except instead of me talking to Chris face-to-face, I'm talking to Chris Pixels, and my brain is tricked after a while, and I think Chris is there. And and so basically the same flow of everything we're doing in person happens. And then from a meta perspective, you can see all the mobs and hop around like we're walking around the building, so to speak. So I could be in mob 1, and then mob 3 will reach out and say, hey, that thing you were involved in today, can you hop over and help us with that? Or as Chris was saying, a specialist might jump, which happened actually today, where we had a DBA specialist in mob 1, and they jumped all the way over to a completely different product and team because they were doing that kind of work. And she could provide a lot of value there. And so you can see who is in each mob and hop around. And anything else to add on this one, Chris?
No, yeah, that's a good depiction. It's pretty much like walking around the office and joining a group of people around a monitor. Very easily done. You can use kind of TeamViewer or AnyDesk or any of those platforms for sharing your screen.
Yep, right on. And psychological safety. So, mobbing itself requires a lot of psychological safety. So it's something we really emphasize a lot. And that is the ability to be your full self, voice your opinion. You feel safe, and you're able to, share an idea, share a concern, and ask questions to others. And so currently, kind of how I feel like it's comparing mobbing to non-mobbing. The psychological safety is, orders of magnitudes higher in my experience, where we have teams, everyone, I've been on mobs where everyone's comfortable, everyone's sharing ideas, we're running experiments, and we're improving the product right there on the fly. And then there's been other experiences, so that's been dramatically better than non-mobbing experiences. But there are times, with all people stuff where, people feel less safe. It takes some time to warm up. And so we're always continually trying to improve how we interact with each other to increase psychological safety. And that's an area of, something I'm excited about with mobbing, but it's also an area for more growth as we're learning how to interact with different people and different styles. Cross-functional lean coffees, Chris. Yeah, what are you thinking here?
Yeah, so this is a practice that we ended up adopting for people that had maybe joined the mob less frequently. So, say a product owner is uncomfortable with sitting with the team, and but we still want to improve our process with them. Cross-functional lean coffees will essentially be a lean coffee discussion about how do we work better together for groups that are farther away. So, maybe firmware engineers or something that don't interact directly with the software that the team is creating, but we want to understand ways of working better together. Then you might introduce a regular cadence of lean coffees to make it not really directed, but just, I think the lean coffee format actually lends itself very well to essentially capturing ideas, even from people who are more quiet or don't want to really, put things out there directly, and then allowing you to kind of create solutions around those things. And so you get together, especially if you haven't been in a retrospective with any cross-functional boundaries that your team may have. Creating these have been extremely helpful in just improving relationships, improving understanding between teams, especially when people feel uncomfortable giving feedback about the process for whatever reason.
Right on, right on. And so kind of another current thing that we see is that there's many roles and patterns we've seen in mob programming. And I'll just touch on this briefly, but basically, as Chris talked before, there's a driver, someone at the keyboard while we're mobbing, and then there's someone else navigating, saying what to do. There are people in the mob at the same time, identifying things that are not quite right. So it's maybe the nose. The automationist is looking for ways to take all the manual things we're doing and automate them. And there's people sponsoring each other. There's people researching. There's people drawing. And so there's all these kind of roles and patterns and different ways to mob. But the one thing I'll emphasize, which we'll touch on later for the future, is when everyone is there and working together, innovations, whether it's regard to automation or high level quality, really gets amplified a lot. And we'll see how that turns as we go to the future. But I'd like to emphasize the automationist, Chris. So I think this is one of Chris's favorite hats. So if you want to go share a little bit about current automationist activity.
Yeah, and actually this is, speaking cross-functionally, like saying having a designer in the group. I think one thing that we noticed is that doing things that are mundane and repetitive in a group of 4 people is really painful. And so a lot of people will say, well, how can you be efficient that way if, I have these, I have to like answer my emails or, do these other things. And so what we notice a lot of the time when we do everything together is that there's a lot of opportunity to automate things. I'll use the email example. So say that you answered all of your emails with 3 other people, right? Like you just went through and you were working through them. I think one thing that you'd notice is that, if at least if you're like me, you might get a lot of things that you might have signed up for that you really don't care about anymore, but you are unlikely to hit the unsubscribe button. So like that's an example of the automationist, right? You say unsubscribe, now you've automated your responses for that thing forever, right? And so you no longer get and now you save that time forever, right? But now multiply that amount of time by 4 people. So the amount of pain gets multiplied and the amount of savings when you automate things also gets multiplied. Now, say you have a software developer with you when you're automating those things, and you have a number of steps that you have to go through, manual, repetitive, whatever. And say that you could get rid of those entirely for your entire day, like every repetitive thing that you do throughout the day. Imagine how much time you would save, and then imagine how much time that would save 4 people. And that's kind of where you get this level of response. But in this, it's like if a software developer is writing boilerplate code, you might write a template to generate that. If a UX designer is converting napkin drawings to HTML, then you might use machine learning to do that. Those sorts of things, as you start realizing that certain things can be automated, then they kind of compound on themselves as you go.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of tying that into an example is I was on a team, and when I joined the team, the way it was currently being done was to deploy new version of the app to the store. It was about 120-step manual process. And that also included uploading designer artifacts, whether it was like the marketing material on the app store and that kind of thing too. And so what was an incredible experience is we had someone come join the mob who knew how to automate all that. And so we would, instead of finish writing the code and finishing the design and then going through 120 steps together, it would be a click of the button, and it was in the pipeline. It would automate all those steps we were doing, manual clicks, and it would deploy it to the store automatically for example, Apple or Google to review. And so that was an awesome example. And one thing that was part of it was instead of these waiting queues between designers and marketing putting in, here's the images to put with the app in the store and that kind of thing, they were able to put it in a particular directory, and that would automatically get part of the process and deployed, right? And so the manual waiting around for the code and the design was automated, which was pretty fun. And one thing about Current is mobbing really emphasizes flow efficiency, especially when you compare it to something like code reviews. So Chris, what's your experiences with mobbing versus code reviews and flow efficiency?
Yeah, you can kind of see the image here, but the idea is that every time you have a handoff or an exchange of the item between teams, then that wait time gets injected into the process, which means that there's transition time. Especially, for anybody involved, you are going to have to basically get context of the new item, but that item might get returned to you eventually. And so you can kind of see the back and forth arrows on this diagram here, that eventually you'll see a large gain to the efficiency of releasing the individual items. Now, if you combine that with something like cost of delay analysis, then you'll realize that you can actually get the item that you're working on out much faster, and therefore be making more money or satisfying more customers, and much faster. And these transition times, these wait times, end up going away. And this is the concept of and the difference between resource efficiency versus flow efficiency. And so you can optimize flow this way.
Yeah, and for sure. And this example here is a code review going back and forth, but anything in a process, it could be a design artifact, anything that requires two people and you're kind of bouncing it back and forth. What this graphic shows is that you're introducing a lot of wait time in that process, that if you're doing something like mobbing or co-creation, like pairing or mobbing, all that can happen together, and all that wait time is reduced from a lean perspective, which is great. Yeah, so transitioning to current quality. There is an individual in the industry named Arlo Belshi, and he started this hashtag #BugZero. And the idea of it is conceive of a product where you don't have bugs, right? Where their users aren't being confused from a design perspective, or functionally the software does what it's supposed to. What would that do to your budget? How much time do you spend caring for your bugs, feeding your bugs, your bug backlog, and reshuffling them and putting them off, and then bugs, the existing bugs cause your current feature development to be slower, or the design is not good, so it's making it harder to design new things in the app. And so the idea is, if you develop a process where bugs are kind of eliminated and quality is built in, you reduce a lot of that waste that comes with that. And I have to say that switching from other ways of doing product development to mobbing, I have seen this lived out. And so a lot of people are confused, like, does this mean you literally have no bugs? Some cases that's true, as Chris was talking about earlier. They went a year and a half with no bugs reported back from production. But it's more the idea of, instead of like I've been at other places, we have a bug backlog of 300. It's more like, oh yeah, there was a bug report or two this month, but we fixed it right away, and it's kind of just like a blip on the map, And so yeah, so that's what Bugzero at is, and kind of it seems like a current state for many teams that are doing mob programming. So this will become important when we talk about the future, but there's this concept of the edge of the mob, where product owners, as Chris talked about earlier, and designers and maybe firmware or hardware engineers, they aren't in the mob full time. And so they're more on the edge of the mob. And Chris, are there any interactions that come to mind to you for that, like how that kind of works today currently?
Yeah, so it's like, hey, we need some help on a UX design. Then somebody might join the mob, or not even join the mob, but like maybe you send them what you have now, and then they make some critiques, and then they send it back, and then you implement it, right? That might be the edge of the mob. Also, product owners that are less available, that maybe have other things on their plate, and so one good example of this is if you're in a physical space and you're in a building, and your product owner has to walk from their building to another building, and you see them walk by the window, and you're like, no, we need a question answered, but you can't get that answer. That's a little bit of like the ineffectiveness of the edge of the mob, is that they're not there, they're not immediately available, and so that question has to wait. And so those sorts of interactions can definitely crop up. The less involved that individual is with the team on a day-to-day or direct basis.
Nice, right on. And so now, we're going to put on our propeller hats, and we're going to be talking about the future here. So, so if you imagine, kind of going from the current to the past to the current, the past to the present, and you look about what good things were turned up. So you kind of, you can think of Chris's slide earlier of, hey, when we all work together, these are the good things that happen. Or when we increase automation, these are the good things that happen. If you take those current increases and you apply them into the future, what do you get? And so we'll be doing our speculating on that now. So let's just jump in. And so the first one is basically everyone who is needed is there, right? So wouldn't it be incredible if instead of people being on the edge of the mob, they were there all the time? So the mob was making product decisions. The mob was making design decisions. The mob was doing everything that needed to be done for the product is there. And since everything is automated, which we'll get to in a later slide more, there's no waiting around being like, oh, well, this isn't really relevant to me anymore in my specialist role. Everyone who is needed is there, and we're all learning each other's skills and bringing that to the mob. So I think if you keep turning up the good, from my perspective, it would be the extreme idea that everyone, all the different skill sets needed for any product is there in the mob, in the team, ready right there to contribute what's needed to get the item through the pipeline to provide value to a customer.
Yeah, and right now we have a rule that's essentially, if you're not learning and you're not contributing, go to a different mob, right? So in theory, that would be everyone is engaged and contributing, right, on some level.
Yeah, and that's right, and that emphasizes that it's not forced, right? So in our practice of mobbing, it's by choice, and those people choose their teams by choice, and things like that. And so it would be the same here. If everyone's learning, contributing, they would want to be there, right? And so, Chris, what does the future of code look like to you in this?
So there are these automation tools that are coming out, things like Tab9 and GitHub Copilot, that are essentially will convert either comments or apparent intention into full-fledged pieces of code. There are also systems like low-code and no-code systems for creating capabilities. And so I think the natural evolution of code going forward is going to be from a largely syntactical sort of event, syntactic logic being interpreted. It's now going to be more natural language logic being interpreted. And so the software developer's role will become less and less writing very specific instructions, but more rephrasing or reimagining a product owner's intention in something that the computer can understand. And so there's a lot of great examples of this, but it's emerging right now, and especially with new machine learning models. And if you haven't seen any of the GIFs from GitHub Copilot, it's a really great example. The Tab 9 tool is a little bit less sophisticated, but very similar in the sense that large portions of the code are now being written automatically by these machines. So you know, if watching somebody else write code or typing for somebody telling you what code to write doesn't sound appealing to you, I think that this notion of everybody contributing or learning is going to become much more possible as the discussion goes away from syntax and moves towards natural language interpretation of logical rules. So I think that's where the future of code might go.
Yeah, so I think, and maybe this will turn into a little bit more of a discussion, but so, you know, I imagine a mob sitting there with everyone who's needed to make product decisions, and they say in natural language what they like to happen, and then the code is generated. Chris, is that if we keep turning up the good, that's where it might be?
Yes, and so then it's a discussion of maybe people that think more from the customer's perspective versus the people that think in a very logical way. And so, you know, I think interpreting natural language interpretation will have the ability to implement things that are stated, but I think it'll be a long time before we can actually identify areas where there are logical conflicts in, you know, integration errors in the logic that was verbally produced. So you know, the code will naturally, it probably won't even be code. You just see an application appear with the things that you need in it. But if you can contradict yourself while describing what you need, then, you know, that can be very subtle. And so those are the types of things that I think people that have learned to work with computers throughout their career will end up doing.
Nice. Yeah, and so now switching kind of to the more design aspect of it. And so it's kind of, if I'm interpreting this speculation correctly, is that we will specify the design in natural language, and it will, you know, be made for us, so to speak, right? And so, so kind of more earlier version of this is kind of like sketch to code. And then, so basically that you can specify the design in natural language, and it'll be made for the mob, and everyone who's needed to make adjustments as we're coming up with the design will be there to be like, oh, well, what about this design? And then so we ask it to make something else. And maybe any adjustments that need to be made would be retraining the AI model to match the better designs that we specify and things like that. And so, yeah. And then what would be the future of quality, Chris?
So yeah, I mean, because a lot of this stuff is automated, a lot of the quality checks can also be automated. But I also think that it's going to go one step further because a lot of these systems can be scored in some way. And so really the future of quality really means, you know, once that thing is released to customers, how are you going to score it and revise it based on the customer's interpretation? So if quality issues are no longer a thing, and it's only the quality of the interpretation of the natural language that happens, then you know, we're gonna have to get really good at specifying what the product should do, but also we will need to know how to react from the data that comes back and the interpretation of that data. I think A/B testing will be much more common. I think it's not nearly common enough in the industry as it is. And so when A/B tests become really easy, then a lot of this stuff will be evolutionary in nature. It's like, you know, create me 3 ways of having a submit button. And, you know, so a prompt to the computer might be, I want to have a form where people submit their first name, last name, and birth date. And I'd like 3 variations that we can A/B test so that we can then interpret which way is the best way to do it. And we're going to run the experiment for 3 months, and we want to pick the best design or the most accepted design in this 3-month experiment. And then you'll get these 3 variations of the UI. There'll be some database logic set up to track those things. It will, for 33% of the users, it will show one or the other, and then you get this information back, and it would go back into the product. And so, yeah, so the natural extreme is we're all working together. We're having discussions about, what to do with this tool that can do a whole lot of stuff a lot faster than we can now. Yeah.
Nice. And there's more about the future we can talk, but in light of time, we'll probably start rounding it out now, which is the last thing I'd kind of hit is what I've learned from mobbing is that it really accelerates personal growth. And so for me, you're practicing all the time interacting with people. And how do you do that in a kind, considerate, and respectful way, showing vulnerability, trust, and appreciation, demonstrating psychological safety. And I just feel like the M shape and the T shape, the more and more people will grow in that way to almost like a Renaissance person again, where if you keep turning up the good of mobbing well and interacting well, that will spread around more, the ability to interact and grow more. And also there is a slant on it in regards to team mobility. So the ability to interact with different styles of people and then switch to a different team and interact with that style of team gets better and better the more you do this kind of thing. And so, there could be more, but with that, we're going to jump to the end and say thank you for hearing out our, the past, present, and future of what we think of product development. And you can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and more. And we have a video cast and podcast talking about mob programming, all things product development, agile from a mob programming perspective, where people all around the world come share with us mobbing and their thoughts on lean and product development and things like that. And now we can jump to Q&A. So any questions?